What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be me trying to restore this headlight. It came off of a 2001 Ford Focus. It's the original headlight, so it's very old and hazed over, and fortunately it doesn't have too much yellowing going on, but it's extremely rough and hazy. Now it did have a protective film layer on it, and I can show you the clip of removing that right now. And so what that film does is, what I'm imagining is basically it fills in all the little imperfections on the lens, on the plastic, and so it makes it clear again. But obviously without it, it looks really bad and probably can't perform very well at all. So what I'm going to attempt to do is wet sand it with several types of sandpaper and see if I can buff it out and make it look decent. So we're going to go from this, and this is what it looks like before we do anything. This is after I wet sanded it, and it's still wet, so that's why it's shiny. And this is the final product, and this is what it looks like after it's buffed and polished. Alright, so I have a spray bottle right here. This is just plain water, and then I have some sandpaper. Alright, so I'm going to start with some 800 grit, then I'm going to go to 1000, and then I'm going to end with 1500 grit. And then I'm going to use a coarse buffing pad with some buffing compound and just buff it. And then I'm going to do a polish with some polishing compound and a polishing pad. Alright, so here it is after I wet sanded it with 800 grit, 1000, and then 1500 grit. So with all the sandpapers, I put very, very little pressure on. So yes, I could have used a sponge and wrapped the sandpaper around the sponge and then used it that way. I've tried that method before, and it does work, but for this application, this is not a headlight that I really care about. I'm just testing. So I didn't go for that, but you could take a piece of a sponge or a piece of it and then just wrap the sandpaper around it, and that's going to make it so that you put even pressure all over. Or you could just go very, very lightly. I've done this before, so I kind of know how much pressure to put. I went very lightly with the 800 grit. I did do several passes with the 1000 grit because I found that that is basically the breaking point between the rough sandpaper and the less rough or less coarse sandpaper. So the 1000 grit will erase those really deep grooves that will not buff out. So you want to go, don't put a lot of pressure with the 1000 grit, but do several passes. And then 1500, same thing, it will erase the 1000 grit scratches, and it will help polish or buff the headlight better. So now that it's done, let's dry it up and try buffing it. So at this point, you could either blow it off with some compressed air if you have some, or just clean it off with something. If you don't have any microfibers, you can use a paper towel, but I recommend just getting some microfibers. They're cheap enough, so just buy some. They come in very handy many times, especially if you're doing some car detailing or car washing. I don't use anything but microfibers. And then I'm going to start with some Ultimate Compound, which is pretty much just buffing compound, a slightly more abrasive compound, and then I'm going to finish it up with some polishing compound, which is a lot finer. It'll make it shine more. I'm using a slightly more abrasive sponge pad. Abrasive is not the right word, it's just a little tougher, and it's flat, it's not waffle, so it creates more heat in the center, which in this case it'll help with buffing out more of the roughness of the plastic. So I'm going to shake up the compound a little bit, and then get this installed on the drill. Make sure your work area is clean, unlike the garage floor I'm working on. And then you want to put, I like to put a little bit on the surface that I'm buffing, just a tiny bit. And then I also like to prime the pad. So you put another tiny bit on here. Oops, that might be a little too much actually. And then you just work it into the pad a little bit. And that's all you need. Now you start buffing. So at first you want to go really slow, that way it doesn't fling it everywhere, and you want to work it into the surface that you are buffing. And then you can go full speed. Overlap 50% is what I recommend. So if you go over this way, when you go back down, you overlap your first pass 50%, so half, and then you just keep going on and on and on until you've done several passes on the whole headlight. Do small areas at a time. Don't try and do the whole headlight. I'm going to do the main part of the lens first, and then I'm going to focus on the edges. Alright, you could probably tell there towards the end I put a little more pressure on the drill and on the buffing pad. That was just to create a little bit more heat on the pad and help buff out the plastic a little bit more. So let's wipe it with a microfiber and see what our results are. Oh, there you go. I think honestly so far it's a lot better than what it was. First of all, it's clear now. You can see through it. And I'm going to polish it after this. I'm not going to bother buffing this corner because, like I said, this is not a headlight that I'm reusing. It's going into the trash after. So this was just a test and a how-to video. But obviously you want to do your whole headlight, so yeah. Alright, now if you feel the need to keep buffing, if you think you can still see scratches from the sandpaper, then go ahead and do so. I might actually buff it one more time. I can see some slight scratches over here, and then I'm going to switch to the polishing pad and see how shiny we can get it. Tiny bit more buffing compound. Obviously this is much easier when the headlight is on the car. Alright, as you can see, this pad is very dirty now because as I was buffing, it was actually extracting all the contaminants that were in the plastic on the lens. And even though we wet sanded it with several coats of sandpaper and several passes on each coat, it's still very contaminated and dirty. So this is a good thing, but obviously now it's time to wash this pad and clean it out. So, having said that, let's move on to, actually let's buff off the buffing compound. And then it's time to move on to the polishing compound. Now, it is totally possible that this lens can also be hazy from the inside, and that you can't really do much about it. So whatever haziness remains is probably on the inside of the lens, because this one is really bad. these lenses usually, after they get hazy on the outside, they start hazing on the inside. So for the polish, I'm going to use a waffle style pad, which has those wavy bits to it, raised areas, and this helps minimize heat, and it helps make a shinier finish. So you do want heat when you're trying to cut into the material, and you do not want heat when you're not trying to cut. When you're trying to make it nice and shiny, you want very little heat and a lot of motion. If you have a dual action polisher, that's also good. I use the drill. I have a dual action polisher, but I use the drill because that's something that most people have at home. Obviously the drill only spins in circles. The dual action polisher will have two actions, a dual action, so it spins in a circle, but it also pivots around itself. So it kind of goes like this, and that helps reduce heat and reduce the amount of pressure and buffing motion in one concentrated spot, which means it burns through the material less quickly. So that's actually good for beginners if you're trying to get into buffing paint or anything. Headlights, it's not that big of a deal because it's just thick plastic, but if you're trying to buff your car, buff paint, clear coat, and whatever, it's actually better to start off with a dual action polisher. That way you ensure that you're not going to burn through the paint. And once you master that, then you can switch over to a regular single action polisher or whatever you might have. It does go quicker with that, but it is a little more risky, especially if you're dealing with thin clear coat or delicate paint or something. So anyway, back to our headlight. Let's shake up the polishing compound and apply it, prime our pad, and start polishing it. Alright, so I'm gonna apply just a tiny bit to the headlight, tiny bit to the pad. You don't need a lot of this stuff. I'm not gonna prime it using my finger this time. I'm just gonna tap it onto the headlight and make it spin a little bit. Alright, I think this is it for polishing. Now I think I put a little bit too much polish on because it started flinging it everywhere. And well, that's how you know you put too much on. Alright, let's buff it off. And there we go. This is our final result. It is still a tiny bit hazy, so I think that's just from the inside. And like I said, you can't really do much about that. But this is a lot better than what we started with. And obviously this is a much better light output than we had. The only thing that will keep this nice and clean is putting a protective film on it, which is the same film that you saw at the beginning of the video came off of it. So if you are buffing or wet sanding and buffing and polishing your headlights, if you don't coat it with that protective film, they will haze over in like 6 to 8 months, I would say, maybe a year if you're lucky, especially if you have harsh summer sun or really harsh winters with like salt and road sand and everything. They will haze over very fast because right now you have sanded off the protective layer on the headlight. Well, not that there was any protective layer anymore, but stock headlights or new headlights will come with a protective layer. Once you remove that, all the UV rays will go through the plastic, oxidize the plastic, and will ruin it and make it hazy, crack, and just make it not pretty. So you do want to put that protective layer or the film on it, and that will save it and keep it nice and shiny for a long time. So this is what happens to headlights that are even worse than the one we just polished or buffed and everything. This one's not just hazy, but it's yellow and it's pitted. So I don't know if this one is restorable or not. Obviously it's worth trying because you can get it better than what it is now, but it's still not great at all. It has very, very poor light output. Alright, so this is pretty much it. This is how to buff and restore your headlight in a nutshell. As you can see, this is a lot better than what we started with, and obviously even if you don't protect it with the special film, it's gonna get you by for now. If you don't have that, or if you don't want to buy it or don't have access to it, just wax your headlight all the time. I would say at least once every 2 weeks, give it a coat of wax, 2 to 3 weeks, and that will help keep it protected for a little longer. Or like I said, just buy that film. It'll keep it nice and shiny. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. I hope it was helpful, and I hope you liked it. Don't forget to leave me some comments below if you have any other suggestions or any comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more content. I'll see you in the next one.